Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 24th of July of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. First we're going to start, of course, probably with the most important events that took place during the previous 24 hours. Of course, there were very heavy clashes on the Bradley Square. The Russians managed to advance and penetrate Ukraine's defense orders on the Kupiansk front line and so on. But it's my opinion, of course, it's up to you, but I think that the most important event that took place today was the Russian drone and missile attack against a small settlement on the most southern part of Ukraine, against the port area in the settlement by the name of Reni. This one. Why I'm saying that this is one of the most important events, you know that the previous days, the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, made a lot of events, a lot of meetings with different people, with different authorities, with different countries, and he was asking them, for example, to provide some kind of secure road for the Ukrainian ships and the ships in the Black Sea. He was asking the NATO countries to support him with the weapon. He had some negotiations with the Western countries about entering the territory of Ukraine with Western weapon, with Western army and so on, with NATO army and so on. And this night, the Russians made that attack. And as you can see on the screen, you can see the videos that were made on, let's say, on the NATO bank of the river. So basically, you see that explosions and the Russian attack was exactly on the border of NATO. And this is the very big disaster because if you ask my opinion, I don't see any problems for the NATO countries, for Romania to be more precise, for the United States of America, to shut down every single drone and every single missile that were heading in direction of this small settlement on the southeast western part of Ukraine. I don't see any problems. And you know that if the United States of America shut down NATO countries, NATO shut down those drones, I don't think that there would be any problems even with Russians. Because you always can say that we saw a danger, we saw some aggression, we saw some missiles that were heading in direction of Romanian and NATO borders, so that's why we took a decision to shut them down. And believe me, the Russians in this case would not do anything, because take a look at this area, and this is exactly took place on the border between NATO and Poland, and probably a few meters to the west or a few meters to the south, and the explosions could take place on the territory of NATO. So as I understand, there are no problem with this. You can always say that there was some kind of automation system, that air defense is automation system, and we saw the risks, and that's why we took a decision to shut down. But the main thing that the NATO countries didn't even use their fingers to prevent this situation. And this is the most terrible piece of news for the Ukrainians. So we see that this is like a blue, we always talk about the red Russian line, but that was a blue NATO line. And the Russians, probably for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation, managed to cross this small blue NATO line a little bit, but they managed to cross this line, and the NATO countries haven't managed and haven't replied nothing to this situation. And Zelensky understand for sure that NATO countries, at least after this case, are not longer going to protect Ukraine, and they will not provide them any defense, even if the explosions will take place on the border, in a meter of the border line. Of course, this is terrible for the Ukrainians, because it completely should change their plans, if they have any plans, and it completely should give them complete understanding of the situation, that they need to fight with the Russians probably till the last Ukrainian if they want to, let's say, to return control over the territory of Ukraine. But everybody understands that it's highly unlikely that Ukrainians are able to do this. So we need to pay attention to the situation, and as you can see, nobody was talking about this. We haven't received any reaction from the NATO countries, from Romania. Nobody talked anything. Nobody was saying that, oh my God, this is a terrible situation, the Russian rockets was blowing on the border with NATO countries. We haven't seen nothing of that. And this is the biggest problem. Now we're moving to Crimea one more time. The Ukrainians made another massive missile strike with the Storm Shadow missiles, and as a result of one of those attacks, where another ammo depot was destroyed. According to the Russian sources, 4 missiles were launched in the direction of Crimea, and 4 of them got the target. Now we're moving to the Bradley Square, to this area. As you can see, I have added a lot of icons in this area, a lot of icons, a lot of events. Probably the Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours made probably the biggest offensive operation in direction of Robotina. They used dozens, maybe even hundreds of armored vehicles, light vehicles and tanks, and I'm not talking even about infantry. There were probably hundreds of soldiers that were heading to the south, and the Russians, of course, were completely ready. We couldn't say that before the Ukrainians started, because we didn't know whether the Russians were ready or not, but after a day of very fierce fightings on this front line, we understand that the Russians were ready and that the Russians were expecting the Ukrainians on the south in the vicinity of Robotina. And now we can say for sure that the Ukrainians were completely defeated, and they were I can't tell you whether the Ukrainians were forced to step back or not because of that Ukrainians step back or not. I'm not saying whether anybody from the Ukrainian forces have survived after such a suicide operation. The Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainians with all types of weapons they have. And one more time, I'll repeat my thought that during the previous day, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't seen even a single video confirmation of a real battle between Russian army and the Ukrainian army. There was just a suicide rush from the Ukrainian side, from Novodanilovka to the south, and the Russians were bombing and shelling the Ukrainians along the way with all types of weapons they have. Of course, the biggest number of video updates are coming from the south of this salient, from between Robotin and, let's say, Novodanilovka and the road NO8. The Ukrainians probably managed to enter this area. Probably they managed to land some troopers who were trying to create a small bridgehead in this area and some positions, and to dig in as deep as possible before the reinforcements arrived. But the Russians were ready for that, and starting from the first second when the Ukrainian forces entered this bridgehead, the Russians started bombing and shelling the Ukrainians with drones, mainly with Lancet drones. We got dozens of videos of attacking against the Ukrainian armored vehicles, Bradleys, Leopards, against Ukrainian T-64 tanks, just personal carriers and so on. A lot of armored vehicles were destroyed. A lot of Ukrainian forces troopers were killed under fire, mainly under artillery fire, and so on. For example, on this video we see how the Ukrainian tank probably already damaged. He probably was moving to the south, maybe on automatic mode, and the tank got on the minefield and was destroyed. Also, we got another drone attack somewhere in the vicinity of the same area. Maybe this is the same tank. First the Russians managed to damage the tank to deal him, as you can see, there's a tank Leopard, and maybe after that damage the tank was moving to the south and just caught in the minefield. Very difficult to understand. Also, we got some updates from the northern part of this area. We see that one demanding tank was staying on the ground, and Bradley probably was trying to protect or defend, and the Russians, as soon as they discovered this armored vehicle, continue bombing of this area. Furthermore, we got some video, very interesting video of helicopters. As soon as the Ukrainians entered this salient, the Russians start bombing and attacking the Ukrainians' armored vehicles with the helicopters, with Ka-52. This is the doomsday weapon, as I understand, and yet the Ukrainians, since the beginning of the counter-offensive operation, haven't managed to destroy even or shut down even a single one. Maybe they managed, but we haven't received any video or photo confirmation. And of course, as a result of those fierce fightings, the Ukrainians made one big mistake, the biggest mistake. They left a lot of vehicles on the ground. A lot of vehicles that the Russians are able to use. They're completely fixed. There's no problem with them, and all of them will be transferred to the Russian scientists or engineers, and they will make some kind of engineering stuff, and will improve and make their own weapon better. Furthermore, that was not the only area where the Ukrainians were trying to develop their offensive operation. There was another area where the Ukrainians were trying to attack, and we are talking about the central and the western flank of the same area. On this video, we see another convoy of the Ukrainians who was heading to the south. Their attempts to attack the Russian forces, and of course, we have another area where the Ukrainians was trying to develop their offensive operation, and I'm talking about the area in direction of Verbova, in this direction. For now, as I understand, the Ukrainians haven't managed to achieve any success, any results. We also have a lot of video confirmations from this bridgehead. A lot of hundreds of dozens probably of Ukrainian armored vehicles were destroyed among those fields, and some of those tanks was destroyed and armored vehicles as a result of artillery strikes, as a result of anti-tank missiles and so on. For example, in this video we see how a small Ukrainian tank Leopard was trying to hide himself in between the brushes, but of course it's just a useless waste of time. The Russians control this territory 100%. They discovered, and then they start bombing and shelling attacking these armored vehicles with Lancet drones. And we got more video. Some armored vehicles arrived to the forest line trying to evacuate probably some Ukrainian soldiers, but with attack of anti-tank missile, that armored vehicle was destroyed. I'm not sure about the real number of Ukrainian forces, Ukrainian armored vehicles that were destroyed during this battle, but probably the losses of the Ukrainians. I believe that in a day or two we're going to receive some updates from the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, but I believe that the level that Ukrainians lost more than probably 30 or 40 armored vehicles, including tanks, Bradleys, T-64-72 and other armored personal carriers, and probably a few hundreds of soldiers were killed and Ukrainians lost during that battle. So that was almost the same situation as we saw on the 4th, 5th and the 6th of June. I don't know why the Ukrainians took a decision to repeat the same operation, because nothing have changed since that battle. The Ukrainians haven't received F-16, the Ukrainians haven't received more weapon, they haven't received new weapon, they haven't involved, let's say, even challengers with uranium depleted munition in that operation, and the most important, the Ukrainians haven't used cluster shells, because you know that another interesting aspect, another interesting side of that battle, that we've received a lot of videos from the Ukrainians, like bloody suicide rush, but we haven't received any video or photo confirmation of work of Ukrainian artillery, because the Russian artillery positions are located not, let's say, in Tokmak or let's say somewhere in Berdyansk. The main Russian artillery positions are located not very far from this area, and basically the Russian artillery systems are located, let's say, somewhere on this line. So somewhere on this line, and for example, we got just one video how the Ukrainians managed to discover, and there are a lot of like small video cuts of destroyed Russian armored vehicles, but this is not enough. You know that this is not enough. The question is where the Ukrainian artillery systems while the Ukrainian rush. Furthermore, we haven't received any updates, any video or photo confirmation of Su-25 usage. That was a very significant and powerful attack from the Ukrainian side, but there were no Su-25. There were no Mi-24 helicopters or Mi-8 helicopters. We know that Ukrainians don't have Ka-52, but they have their own types of helicopters, and we know that recently the Ukrainians got some more helicopters from Poland. So what was that attack? Just armored vehicles to the south without any support? If it's true, then what is the real purpose of that? Furthermore, you know that for example, the Russians, as a result of those fierce fightings and so on, published the first confirmation that the Russians managed to capture and to get a switchblade. And that was probably the video confirmation of the first usage of this type of weapon by the United States of America. I believe that the Russian engineers and scientists are very happy to get almost not damaged, we can say, reading quotes, switchblade. And of course, with these technologies, they will be able to improve Lancet, and in a few months we are going to see more dangerous type of weapon on the Russian side, because Lancet switchblades, when talking about the technical characteristic, are more powerful in comparison with Lancet. For example, switchblade can fly for around 80-90 kilometers, and the Russians Lancet just 40-70. So the Russians will be able to improve, and the most important, the attack part of switchblade is around 8.4 kilos of explosion, and Lancet has just 3 kilos. So we'll see there's some kind of improvements based on Switchblade technologies. Furthermore, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported, and this is one of the most important updates, that the Russians by this date, by July of 2023, found a solution and have already improved their production, and currently the Russians are able, and not just are able, but they're producing Russian weapon, the same amount, the same quantity as they used to produce during the peacetime per year. So now the Russians, let's say in August of 2023, are able and will produce the same amount of weapon, let's say as they produced, let's say, in 2021. Imagine yourself in 1 month to produce the entire yearly plan. Of course, the Russians don't have any problems with any type of weapon, with rounds, with shells, with tanks, and the Russians are producing not like T-64 or T-55 like old Soviet types. They're producing modern weapon like Lancet, like T-90, like Krasnopol rounds, and many other types of weapon like Su-34 modernized, Su-35 with guided bombs, in armored personnel carriers. It's a very powerful, very modern weapon, and now the Russians have established the production of newly weapon, and the only thing they need is to start improving by getting the Western technologies. And as I understand, as a result of these clashes, the Russians managed to get a lot of Western technologies, and they will improve their weapon. And in a half a year, we're going to see another new Russian army, completely updated, upgraded, and I don't know what Ukrainians are thinking about with these suicide operations and so on. If you ask my opinion, I believe that Ukrainians, if they want to continue clashes, they need to fight just from the defense state. But even in this case, the Russians anyway sooner or later will improve their bombings, their guided bombs, and even this tactic won't help the Ukrainians to win this battle, this war. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings in the area between Petykhatki, Bradley Square, and the Vremivka tactical bridgehead in Ugledar, the Ukrainians lost 120 soldiers. As I understand, the Russians still haven't calculated the entire loss of the Ukrainians on the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. I believe that we're going to receive these numbers probably later. Furthermore, the Ukrainians made few attempts to attack Zherebyanki. It was just a regular reconnaissance in combat. Few Ukrainian soldiers, few squads were moving, a few soldiers, a small reconnaissance team was moving on the north, trying to find out the Russian machine gun positions, their drone positions. The Russians managed to discover those troopers, and after that the Russians started bombing and shelling the Ukrainian trenches, and probably those soldiers were wounded or were forced to step back. We haven't received almost nothing from Vremivka tactical bridgehead, just some videos from the Ukrainian side. Now the Ukrainians are completely focused and changed their focus in direction of Priutina after a few attempts to attack Staromayorska, and when the Ukrainians understood that there is no chances to capture the settlement because of many things, including ambush, including the thing that this settlement is located on the ground, on the lowland, the Ukrainians changed their focus on Priutina and took a decision to attack from Livadna. And now they're doing some kind of drone preparation. We can't call it like artillery preparation because the Ukrainians are not using artillery for these purposes. The Ukrainians use just drones, FEP drones they have, to attack Russian infantry positions of Russian forces, machine gun positions, sniper positions, and they're just publishing this video. So basically they're doing the same as the 10 Mountain Assault Brigade in the vicinity of Berestovaya. On this video we see how the Ukrainians managed to discover position of Russian tank, probably T-64, and attack this tank with a drone. And maybe that tank was damaged or even destroyed, but without any changes on the ground. A lot of very interesting updates are coming from Ugledar area. At least for today, the Russians published few videos of destroyed Ukrainian strongholds inside of this settlement. This video is not geolocated, but the settlement is not so big. As you can see, as a result of guided bombs, attack with the usage of the guided bombs, the Russians managed to ruin at least maybe 1 or 2 buildings that the Ukrainians were using as strongholds in the battle and fightings with the Russians. So probably the Ukrainians will continue using these tactics. They will try to reduce and destroy every single Ukrainian position, stronghold in this settlement, and after that they will be able just to capture, let's call it like ruins, but maybe for them, according to their doctrine, it's better than to attack these strongholds trying to save this settlement settlement, because we saw the battle in January and the Russians didn't have any chances to capture that settlement. When talking about Donetsk, the battle, there are still fierce fightings, but we haven't received any updates from this bridgehead. When talking about Krasnogorovka, as we discussed in the morning video, the Ukrainians continue accumulation of their forces on the flanks of Russians in the vicinity of Krasnogorovka. Of course, the Russians can see everything, they can track everything, and always they try to attack the Ukrainians during the movements. When talking about Bakhmut, Artyomovsk, we haven't received any video updates, probably because of parties, either the Russians and the Ukrainians were focused in on the Bradley Square, where the Ukrainians made attempts to attack. Probably this evening, after a small operational pause on the Bradley Square, the Ukrainians will continue offensive operation in Klishchiivka, because the Russians are saying that after the Ukrainians had such a significant losses on the Bradley Square, there is a very calm situation. The Ukrainians are not attacking and haven't been attacking the Russians probably since the noon time of the local time of 24th of July. And maybe the Ukrainians will restart their offensive operation in Klishchiivka. Or another option is that Ukrainians currently are trying to redeploy all the reserves and forces they have to the Kupiansk front line. The only video we got from this bridgehead is a attempt of Ukrainian forces to attack and to continue advancing of the forces of 30th Mechanized Brigade in the vicinity of Zeleznyanskaya. During the previous week, we got at least 3 or 4 videos from this area, and those were the videos that shown us successful advances of the Ukrainians in this area. They managed to penetrate the Russians' defense belt, not so deep, but they're pushing and forcing the Russians to step back from these forest lines in direction of Orekhovo, Vasilievka, and of course Berkhovka. For now, the Russians control this forest, but as we can see, the situation is not the best for the Russians, and some Russian forces were forced to step back from some strongholds and their defense positions in this forest. The Ministry of Defense reported that as a result of fierce fightings on Donetsk front line, the Ukrainians lost 160 soldiers, 3 tanks and 3 artillery systems. Probably this is the lowest level of the losses of the Ukrainians during the previous 7 days. Also, we continue receiving some updates from the 10th Mountain Assault Brigade in the vicinity of Berestova. They continue publishing the videos of hunting after the Russian forces among the fields. And as you can see, another video how the Ukrainians were trying to get the Russians with bombings, with drones, FEP drones. And the Ukrainians, this brigade is probably the most experienced, and they have, as I see, endless resource to the FEP drones, and they do have possibilities to attack the Russians 24 hours per day and not giving them even a second for some kind of relax. Now we are moving to the Kupiansk and Liman front line. Liman front line is stable. The Russians still in defense state. They are not planning to attack, at least maybe today. The Ministry of Defense reported that as a result of fierce fightings on this area, the Ukrainians lost around 195 soldiers and 11 armored vehicles, and the main losses took place not in the vicinity of Tarskoye Salient, but of course in the vicinity of Karamzinovka bridgehead. For now, this area is covered with the fog of war. Most of the Russian military experts ask us not to be in a hurry, to wait a little bit, because this territory is covered with the fog of war. Today we got a lot of updates from this bridgehead. According to information we got, some sources are saying that the Russians managed to complete the clearing operation of Novaya Gorovka. Some sources are saying that the Russians managed to advance further and to establish control over Sverdlovka, this settlement on the west of Novaya Gorovka. Some sources are saying that the Russians managed to clear Sergeyevka and to continue their advances to the west. Some sources are saying that there are still very fierce clashes for Nadia. Very difficult situation. The only thing that confirms about the situation on the ground is the report of the Ministry of Defense that says that the Ukrainians lost around 195 soldiers, and probably this is the heaviest level of losses since April. So this is the only evidence about very high intensity of clashes in this area. And the Russians, according to information, have continued advances, but we still haven't received any video or photo confirmation from any forest Maybe the Russians try to hide this operation as much as possible, not even to provide information about the forces, about the number of forces, about the types of weapon, about the number of brigades and titles of brigades in this area, about the quantity of forces. They want to complete this. They want to keep this operation in secret operation as long as possible. This is the only explanation, and they want to not to give the spread the information about the situation as long as possible. I don't think that Ukrainians don't have this piece of information. As I understand, Ukrainians have already discovered and necessary the things they need, but yet we see the Russians continue advancing, and as you can see, the Ukrainians don't know what to do with this Russian offensive operation. When talking about the disposition of forces, according to the piece of information we have, the Ukrainians have there just 103rd Defense Brigade. Of course, there are some forces from 92nd, probably 32nd Brigade, from 62nd Mechanized Brigade, but currently they don't know what to do. They don't know how to stop the Russians' advances. And one more time, according to the Russian sources, as a result of offensive and storming operation in this area, the Russians managed to capture more than 40 soldiers. And very interesting, probably I would like to note this piece of information for you. We got probably the first public video confirmation of usage of Lancet drones on this bridgehead as well, because maybe there were Lancet strikes, but I'm not sure. If you ask my opinion, I don't remember the Lancet strikes of the Russians exactly on Liman front line in this area, at least. Maybe, of course, I believe they were there, but for some reason the Russian forces wasn't so fast to publish those evidence. And today we got the first one of another Lancet strike in this bridgehead. So probably the Russians will increase the pressure and will continue advancing to the west, trying to get as fast as possible, the most important word in this situation, to get as fast as possible to Oskol River. And the faster the Russians are able to get Oskol River, the less losses they will have, and of course the better progress they will achieve after they get the river, and will be able to turn some forces to the north and some forces to the south. When talking about Kupiansk front line and about this area, the Russians reported that Ukrainians lost 95 soldiers, also very heavy level of losses in comparison with the previous days. So that means that there are also some activation from the Russian side, and the Russians published just one video of bombing and Kislovka. They managed to discover some Ukrainian positions inside of the settlement, and some stronghold of Ukrainians they discovered. They managed to track the Ukrainian movements, and based on some simple analysis, they figured out the Ukrainian positions, and after that they made the Krasnopil probably strike, and probably the stronghold was destroyed, but of course without understanding of the real losses from the Ukrainian side. And probably that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.